Good evening and welcome back to part 2 of UWW-TV's Conference Realignment Shakeup. I'm your host Sam Matheny, and along with Matt Bruzas here, we ask you to please excuse our momentary interruption of sports from your regular daily schedule. Let's get right back into it. Matt, the American Athletic Conference has slowly been creeping its way back into the spotlight in the past few years.
Yeah, and as you see, we're going to realign this conference and add some additions. Central Florida, Cincinnati, Connecticut, Louisville, Memphis, and Penn State comes over from the Big Ten. Pittsburgh and Rutgers also comes over from the Big Ten. SMU, South Florida, and Syracuse comes from the SEC. And to round out, Temple rounds out the 12 teams in the AAC.
Yeah, we have a lot of shakeups in this conference, and let's just start with UConn. You know, UConn joins from the Big East, like you said. UConn traditionally they've been a little bit interesting over the years. They went from the Big East, then they bounced back to the AAC, and then they went back to the Big East this year. So it's kind of interesting to see what they can do. They've won a few national titles. They have 4 in the Big East so far. But my main concern is that the AAC definitely should have 12 teams, and that would bring back the Syracuse-UConn rivalry. Yeah,
I really like that, and I think that's one of the reasons why those two teams are in it, and that's why you're taking away Syracuse from the ACC. But because Syracuse has been, over the past couple of years, they've been really good in both basketball and football. Like when they were in the ACC, they've given teams like Duke and North Carolina a run for their money, especially with Jim Boeheim and how far they went in the tournament this past season. And then if you look on the flip side with football, like they've given Clemson a run for their money a few times as well. I really like Syracuse, but I also really like that rivalry. You go back to the 6 overtime game that Syracuse and UConn had in the Big East Championship. I think reigniting that rivalry would be something special.
Yeah, and having Rutgers and Penn State back in that side, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's where they would go, either that or the Big East, because I think Rutgers, again, they haven't been where they should be. They're on the upward trajectory for basketball, but again, football is, again, kind of an afterthought. But again, I think they're going to focus more on basketball. But again, I think what they do better at is if they're going to be in the ACC or the AAC, the competition level is going to go down compared to the Big Ten. And so I think that's where they would be best at.
You just said it yourself. Yeah, I agree with you. That would be where they're best at. They're playing with top teams in the Big Ten every dang year, and it's so difficult for them to even do anything. Like you said, they're an afterthought. They're not used to being one of the premier teams in their conference. It's kind of weird. They're one of those weird two-left shoe kind of things where you have a team that we just don't know where they want to go. But I think it makes sense because it'll geographically place them by them.
Yeah, and again, also if you look at Louisville coming into this conference, you could also argue they should be in the SEC because they're in Kentucky, and Kentucky's in the SEC as well.
Next up, UWW-TV's restructure of the ACC. On this special two-part edition of PEOMIOSFYRDS.
Warhawks know what it takes to become champions. At the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, our student athletes pursue excellence with a determination that inspires everyone on campus. Warhawks are smart. Warhawks are strong. Warhawks value service. We prepare our student athletes for life after college. The University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Come be part of the Warhawk family.
UWW-TV has been an important part of the campus and community since 1980.
Not only providing on-air learning opportunities for broadcast journalists and electronic media production students,
but educating and entertaining our audiences with award-winning news, live sports coverage, original programming,
as well as dedicating the mission to developing creative collaborations throughout campus.
For more information, visit our website, our 24/7 stream, and like us on Facebook.
Check us out because you gotta see what's on UWW-TV.
UW-Whitewater Athletics, a relentless pursuit of excellence across 22 sports, powered by a tradition of success. 20 national championships, 17 since 2002. 61 individual national titles. 24 National Athletes of the Year. 616 All-Americans. 115 Conference Scholar Athletes of the Year. 1,500 community service hours annually. Be a part of the tradition and join the Warhawk family.
Here at UW-Whitewater Intramural Sports, we have a motto: a sport for everyone and everyone in a sport.
Come on! I count it.
Had a blast. Always have fun at intramurals.
Every day we strive to go above and beyond that goal by providing healthy exercise, promoting leisure education, and giving students that competitive atmosphere they are looking for.
Yes. Yes!
It's exciting. Brings me back to those high school days with Friday Night Lights.
With our 25 different intramural sports offered, we guarantee that we have a sport for you. Go to our website and find your sport today.
While paper facial coverings can only be used once, other facial coverings should be washed after every use to reduce the risk of spreading germs. Some facial coverings can be laundered, but washing them with soap and water in the bathroom is also an effective and efficient method for disinfecting. The students shown here wore their facial covering until they entered the bathroom, thoroughly washed it with dish soap and water, and brought it to their room to air dry. Always allow your mask to dry completely before reuse. If you do not have dish soap at your disposal, please use the provided hand soap in the community bathrooms.
Welcome back to Please Excuse Our Momentary Interruption of Sports from your regular daily schedule. Matt, let's take another look at a different conference, the Atlantic Coast Conference, another Division I conference we would shake up. And as you can see on the screen here, the teams that we have so far in our new conference is Clemson, Duke, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Maryland, Miami, Florida, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and West Virginia. Matt, these are a lot of shakeups that we have. What do we have for shakeups?
Yeah, and so Boston College and Notre Dame leave to the Big East. Pittsburgh and Syracuse, formerly in the ACC, go to the AAC. And then coming into the ACC is Maryland and West Virginia. I really like West Virginia coming into the ACC because if you're going to have Virginia Tech and Virginia, it only makes sense geographically to have West Virginia into the ACC. And I also think they've been pretty solid with basketball and football. So I think that, again, they could stir up some great rivalries in that conference.
I'd agree. West Virginia should be there just because of where they're geographically located. They're in the Big 12 right now. Doesn't make any sense at all. All those teams are from like Nebraska, Oklahoma, and down. And the other teams, and the lone team out in the East is West Virginia, so it really doesn't make sense. If the NCAA wants to minimize cost and maximize opportunity for their student athletes and for themselves financially, they should definitely take West Virginia out. And I also want to ask you a question here. Football has kind of been on the uprise. What do you think of the ACC in terms of football?
I think actually it's pretty good. Obviously, we have the dominant Clemson because they have a stranglehold on basically the whole entire country in Division I. But again, some teams have given them a run for their money. Syracuse over the years has been that one. Duke maybe, North Carolina coming into their own as well. They won a bowl game last season. And so again, maybe West Virginia as well. They've been pretty dominant in the Big 12 for the past couple of years. So if they came over, I think this would have a changing of the guard and we would see a more even ACC conference in terms of football because of the talent level.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty even for a while. The last few years, like you said, haven't been the greatest in terms of competition in the conference. But in the past, there's teams like Reggie Bush and Georgia Tech and teams like Florida State that really just took the ACC by in the choker hold, like you said, and when they had Jameis Winston and when they were pretty good around the time of Tim Tebow.
Yeah, and again, we go back to last season when we had the #1 team in Clemson take on the #4 team in Notre Dame. And that was one of the game for the ages because that was the talent level, because you had top team Clemson versus Notre Dame. And so that's only if you had a top team in there. But now North Carolina is starting to be that team in football with Mac Brown coming over as head coach. I really like what they've done in North Carolina. And so I think football in the ACC will only go up from here, especially with North Carolina and Syracuse and West Virginia as well.
Now, flipping gears to basketball here, I think the ACC has had a kind of a down year in terms of basketball. Why do you think that was?
I think maybe it could be contributed to the one and dones. We see a lot of top talent go to the ACC. We're one and dones, Duke, North Carolina, to name a few. And so I think it's not having other starters that can manufacture points. I think North Carolina did a good job, obviously making the tournament, but then having a first-round exit to Wisconsin. But I think it's not having a full, well-rounded team and a full, well-rounded roster. But then, again, that goes to the coach. And they got to, like Mike Krzyzewski's got to make sure that he gets his guys ready to play every night. Because, again, at a program like Duke, you've got to make sure that you've got guys who can go on the floor and compete.
How much of the not successfulness do you think had to do with COVID?
I think maybe a little bit, obviously, because if you're Duke, for example, I know I'm bringing up Duke a lot, but again, that's one of the programs that had a down year last year, but have been at the top of their game previous years. But again, they didn't have the Cameron Crazies at all. Like, they didn't have any fans in their building, and usually that's how they get energy and they get momentum on their side in terms of games. Like, in the course of a game, like, you could have one changing play, and that's the difference between a win or a loss.
I agree. North Carolina versus Duke is one of the premier matchups every season. Next up, UWW-TV's restructure of the Pac-12. And finally, the SEC. We'll be right back here with more PEOMIOSFYRDS.
On. Flip them off. 91.7 WSUW. 91.7 is a student-run radio station serving the Whitewater area with a variety of original programs, live sports broadcasting, community events, and more. So turn us on. 91.7 FM. Or stream us live at 917theedge.com.
UW Whitewater Athletics, a relentless pursuit of excellence across 22 sports, powered by a tradition of success. 20 national championships, 17 since 2002. 61 individual national titles. 24 National Athletes of the Year. 616 All-Americans. 115 Conference Scholar Athletes of the Year. 1,500 community service hours annually. Be a part of the tradition and join the Warhawk family.
As an Army ROTC cadet at Whitewater, you have the opportunity to develop into a great leader while learning and applying the Army values to your everyday life. Within ROTC, you have the chance to travel overseas in the CULP program to train with other militaries, attend many elite Army schools such as Airborne and Combat Diver, and you have the opportunity to attend conferences and guest lectures by some of the Army's top-ranking officers. Our Warhawk cadets participate in many extracurricular activities, Division III sports, Greek life, intramural sports, among many other team building and community service events. Being a cadet at Whitewater is more than just being part of the Army. It's also about being active members in our community and coming together to form a family atmosphere. Anyone who wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves while developing themselves professionally should consider UW Whitewater ROTC. To sign up for UW Whitewater ROTC, go to the 4th floor of McCutcheon Hall to room 417.
For the health and safety of those living on campus, all residence hall water fountains have been turned off. However, the refill component remains active, so students can fill up their water bottles hands-free.
Welcome back to Please Excuse Our Momentary Interruption of Sports from your regular daily schedule. Let's move on to the Southeastern Conference and how we would realign it. And Matt, as you can see on our screen here, the only teams the teams are staying the same. The only two teams that are leaving are Missouri and Texas A&M.
Yeah, and I think that should be how it is with especially you're giving these teams the right to have the chance to play against their conference rivals. Not breaking those up would not be the best thing in the world, because those athletes really, especially down south, they take their rivals really seriously, and the colleges, and they want to have bragging rights, especially with Florida and Georgia, and then you get Florida and then Miami. Those are really big rivalries, and so I think that's really key in keeping those teams in that conference.
I'd agree, and we see SEC baseball this year. Just quickly touching on that, 6 of the 6 teams in their conference are in the top 10 in the nation for Division I baseball, so they've been incredible. So I just think that's so cool to see how each team has something to offer. While you might think that some conferences are watered down, I think the SEC isn't watered down at all, because each team has something to offer in every individual sport.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think baseball with Vanderbilt, Georgia, even Florida being really powerhouses in Division I baseball, they're really good. And then again, with Alabama, we see them being well-rounded in basketball and football. Obviously, we know Alabama has won all those consecutive championships. And then Alabama being a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, making it all the way to the Sweet 16. They've done a great job of building a great program like UConn did back in 2010. They did a really good job when women's and men's won the basketball championships, and then football does a really good job. And so I think that this SEC conference is really a top tier.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Alabama won the basketball and football conference championship this season. So that's incredible just to think about how well-rounded you have to be. And usually Alabama, aren't they typically like a football school?
Yeah, you typically think them as a football school, but now there's kind of this changing of the guard with Alabama being a basketball school as well, but them being good at basketball. But again, I think it's really, really crazy that Alabama won the conference with basketball and football, given how talented the SEC is, with a lot of talent coming out of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas. That's really incredible that Alabama basketball and football can win.
Yeah, and I think the SEC, like we said, it's not really a watered-down conference. The big thing I want to bring up, though, teams like LSU making a run with Joe Burrow the last few years, or that one year when he transferred from Ohio State. And like all these teams, they're pretty good.
Yeah, a lot of teams, especially in football, are really good. And that's where you get the special moments in college football. The rivalries are amplified by 10 in the SEC because of the fans coming out, packing the stadium. I mean, that's what you live for if you're a college football player and you're going to a Division I school. That's why you go down south as well, because the pageantry is so magnificent and down in the SEC, with like the rivalries of Florida and Georgia, Alabama, especially with LSU. That's become a new rivalry with them being 2 top teams, especially when Joe Burrow was at LSU. They've had some great games over the years.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned Ole Miss, Mississippi, and we haven't also mentioned Tennessee. Those 2 teams used to be pretty good back in the day, too.
Yeah, and again, the Florida-Tennessee rivalry. Like, Florida's got a lot of rivalries with all these teams, and so, again, it only boosts the competition, and they only improve.
Next up, UWW-TV's restructure of the Pac-12. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
At the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, we're passionate about learning. Our talented faculty members blend teaching with research, creating hands-on learning experiences for students. Warhawk Pride thrives at UW-Whitewater, where student-athletes excel on the field and in the classroom, where diversity is celebrated. A tradition of excellence. Find your passion here.
Video One Media Services provides accomplished students the opportunity to enhance their college experience by working with real-world clients. In addition, we provide clients local and affordable video options to better enhance their media needs. For more information on how Video One Media Services can help you with your next media project, email or call our office at 262-472-5659.
UW Whitewater Athletics, a relentless pursuit of excellence across 22 sports, powered by a tradition of success. 20 national championships, 17 since 2002. 61 individual national titles. 24 National Athletes of the Year. 616 All-Americans. 115 Conference Scholar Athletes of the Year. 1,500 community service hours annually. Be a part of the tradition and join the Warhawk family.
Practicing social distancing is imperative to maintaining safety in the residence halls this year in lounges and common areas. For kitchens and laundry rooms, we have capped occupancy at 2 students in these spaces at any given time. Students will not be allowed to wait for their laundry in the laundry rooms, and if 2 students are already in the space switching laundry, please wait outside for one to leave. We ask that those using these spaces are efficient with their time, so all students have the option to use the common areas as needed. We thank you in advance for your cooperation.
Welcome back to Please Excuse our momentary interruption of sports from your regular daily schedule. The Pac-12 is the lone conference we decided not to shake up. What's our reasoning behind this, Matt?
I think obviously because there's 12 teams in there and it's the Pac-12, and I think geographically like all the teams fit. And a couple years ago, the Pac-12 added Colorado, which I think was the lone addition that the NCAA made, and I think it was a really good one. And I think it's been proven because Colorado has done good things in the Pac-12. They were in the Pac-12 title hunt last year in football. They've been pretty good in basketball as well. And so I think it was the right move just to keep it as is.
I agree. Now, Matt, another question for you here. What sport do you think the Pac-12 is the strongest in?
If you asked me that a year ago, I would say football, but now I'm going to hesitate a little bit because how the Pac-12 played in the NCAA tournament, and they did outstanding with Oregon State, Oregon, UCLA making it to the Final Four, and USC also making it to the Sweet 16 as well. I'm going to say football because I think that's what they've been doing it the longest with. They've had a lot of success in football and not a lot of success in basketball outside of UCLA.
Yeah, I feel like teams such as USC, when they had, I'm trying to remember the guy, Reggie Bush.
Bush, yeah.
Yeah, Reggie Bush. I know I messed it up earlier, but Reggie Bush, he was just such a driving force with Pete Carroll at USC, and these football teams have been pretty good in the past. But don't forget about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and big old UCLA. I think it was important to bring them up too because teams with John Wooden were just unstoppable in basketball in the 70s.
Yeah, and I think that's why that's why I think that they're good at football, because no one else around in basketball could have the success in the championships like UCLA does. And so I think for football that Oregon, Washington has had a lot of success. And then if you look at second-tier teams like Arizona State and Arizona, they have quite the rivalry out there in Arizona. And that's something you don't want to mess with, because they get really passionate about their rivalry. And again, it's UCLA, USC, and Washington State as well. Like, they've had really successful seasons in football.
I'd agree. And players such as James Harden in the state of Arizona doing really well, and he was one of those players that has really impacted the NBA. But going back to the Pac-12, I think that the sport I do think they're strongest in would be basketball. Thank you for watching, and tune in next time to hear more hot takes all around the world of sports. That'll do it for us here tonight. This has been Please Excuse Our Momentary Interruption of Sports from your regular daily schedule on UWW-TV.